Right, so in this video, we are going to look at the Walrus operator in Python, and this is a fairly recent addition. I can't exactly remember the version. It could have been Python, could have been as early as Python 3.8 or 3.9. I think it was one of those two versions, but a little bit for users that are used to programming in Python. When it was added, I think there was a little bit of confusion about what were appropriate use cases, and it is something that I believe is quite unique, at least in the programming languages that I had used previously. Before coming to Python, hadn't seen anything that was quite like it. And it really kind of took me a while to kind of get my bearings about when this would be a good, what would be a good use case for this. But once you kind of realize that it can definitely save some lines of code, and there's some really nice applications for it in things like web scraping and whatnot. But let's get a sense of what this Walrus operator is. All right, so if you're seeing the screen, what you see is I've got this dictionary defined, and this is a dictionary that I've used before. It's got some Major League Baseball teams. The keys are the locations, and the values are the names of the teams for those locations. And of course, this is not a comprehensive list. This is just going to be for a demonstration purpose. All right, now, so in a previous video, when I was looking at iteration, I had used this dictionary, or one very similar to it, to illustrate how we could loop over dictionaries, right? So we might say, okay, something like, for location in locations. Let me spell locations correctly. Or for location in MLB teams. Sorry. For location in that. And then we can maybe, okay, get the team name. So we'll say team name equals MLB teams dot get location, and then we will print the location and the team name. All right, so this is what we had kind of used this dictionary for in the past. We were just kind of iterating through this, and we were just printing those. What we're going to do in this video, when we're looking at the Walrus operator, the use case is going to be a little bit different. All right, so let's assume that we've got some data here on MLB teams, and then we've got some other information. We're trying to see, do entries exist in that dictionary for a particular location? So instead of just iterating through them, let's say that we have another object that defines some locations that we're interested in. So maybe Colorado is one of them. Let's say Boston is one of them. All right. And let's say that Birmingham is one of them. Right. Now, instead of just iterating through these, what we want to do is iterate through these locations and see if the location has a team, and if so, print the location and the team. All right. So now, instead of saying for location in MLB teams, we can say for location in locations. All right. And what we'll do is we'll say, well, if the location is in our MLB teams object, all right, and I'm going to nest this under our if, so we've got our conditional. So what we're doing is we're looking through our set of locations. We're checking to see if it's in that dictionary, and even though we might not have, explicitly kind of covered this before, so MLB teams is a dictionary. When you check to see is something in a dictionary, you're checking to see is that value, whatever it is that's stored in location, is it one of the keys of that dictionary? So that's what that check is doing. It's basically saying, okay, well, I'm going to iterate over all this list of locations, and then I'm going to check to see if that each one of those locations is a key of MLB teams. If so, get the location and then print those names. Right? So you can see Colorado and Boston match, right? So we have entries for Colorado and Boston, but we don't have one for Birmingham, so that goes on. All right. Now let's think about a way that we could rewrite this loop. Okay. So let's just kind of think about this, right? So first off, we're having to iterate through our locations, then we check if it's in it, and then if it is, we'll get that team name. All right, now one thing to note, right? So remember MLB teams.get, all right? So whenever we do a dictionary.get and we pass it a potential key, it will look and see, is that key in that dictionary? If not, it's going to return none, okay? And when we're checking none, if you say if none, that's going to evaluate to false. All right, so let's just look at a few things real quick. So first off, let me just to kind of illustrate that before we actually implement the walrus operator. So let's say I've got my var, and that is equal to true. All right, so whenever you're evaluating a conditional, you're basically evaluating, is the statement, is the condition that you've put there, is it true? Does it evaluate to a true value? So I could say something like if my var, because I know my var is equal to true, right? I've set it equal to that. I could say that, and I'm just going to print that worked. That worked, right? Hey, so that works because my var is equal to true. So I defined a conditional here, right? So if my var, and basically that's true. So, and we know this. So again, right? So anytime you do a conditional, if, 3 is greater than 2, well, that's going to evaluate to true, right? So 3 is greater than 2, that evaluates to true. So anytime you're doing conditionals, you're just looking, does that expression that I've defined, does it evaluate to true or false? All right. So in that case, that works. And if I say, well, is 3 less than 2? Right, so that's going to evaluate to false. And that doesn't work. So if my var, going back to the my var piece, if I replace that and I set my var equal to false, it doesn't print, right? Because my var is evaluating to false. All right, so we know now that anytime we're doing conditionals, we're just checking to see if things evaluate to true or false. And if so, if it evaluates to true, we'll do whatever is nested underneath that conditional statement. All right, what happens if we have a none? So what happens if instead of false, we put none here? Well, we do if my var, it doesn't print. That's important. So my var, in this case, is none. So none evaluates to false in Python. There's also some other things that evaluate to false, just to show you that real quickly. So none evaluates to false the same way that. And let's just put the else statement right here so that we can be really explicit. So I'm going to print. So if this evaluates to true, I'm going to print that worked. Otherwise, I'm going to print that didn't work. That didn't work. All right. And let me say did not work for now. All right. So that did not work. All right. Okay. So my var, when it's false, that did not work. When it's none, that did not work. I think an empty string evaluates to false. That did not work. An empty list evaluates to false. And an empty set, or you could think of it as set or dictionary, all of those evaluate to false. Okay, so those are the things, right? So you can have a conditional that evaluates to false, or you can have none, or you can have an empty string, a list, or a empty dictionary or set. And then I think also 0 evaluates to false. Yeah. So whenever you have a 0, that will evaluate to false. So you might, need to make sure that you're aware of all of those cases. All right, so let's go back to our example because we're here talking about the walrus operator, right? And all of a sudden I've went down a wormhole of talking about things that evaluate to true and things that evaluate to false. All right, so let's think through our loop. So we wanted to use this walrus operator to make this better. All right, so first thing, we're checking these locations. Now note that if we were to do mlbteams.get with a location that is not a valid key in that dictionary, what gets returned? Well, if I did mlbteams.get Birmingham, right? So Birmingham is not one of those entries in that dictionary. Well, what does it return? Well, it actually returns none. So if I look at the type of that, it's returning a none type. All right, so that's where the walrus operator will come in, is what we're going to do is we're just going to leverage that fact. Okay, so what I'm going to do, instead of, I'm just going to essentially be checking a okay, for each one of these locations, if I call a .get on that dictionary, does it return something does it actually return a value, meaning that we found that key, or is it returning none? All right. And what I want to do is I want to get it in the cases where it does, because you might want to say, well, okay, we're actually just checking right here. Is that key in it? Well, what if we could do this assignment of the team name all in one go? So check and see if I put that location in that dictionary, does it return a value? And if so, if that's true, right? If it returns something, if it doesn't return none, right? Store that in team name. All right. And that's exactly what the Walrus operator allows us to do. So I'm going to take this line, cut that. All right. And I'm going to say, instead of this check, I'm going to say if team name, and then right now I've got an equals MLB teams.getLocation. Well, this is not going to run. Okay. But what we want to do is we're going to change this if team name, instead of it equal, we're going to put a colon in front of that equals. Okay. And if that's true, what we're going to do is we're going to print, or if it doesn't evaluate to none, or it's true, whatever that statement is, it's going to essentially assign the value that's returned from evaluating that expression in that looping, in that variable there, and then it's going to allow us to print it. All right, so I'm going to restart everything so we make sure everything's clear. That worked. All right, so let's just kind of recap this a little bit again. So first off, why is it called the Walrus operator? Well, they think that looks like a walrus, right? So the colon with an equal sign followed is like a, kind of a walrus. Think of the tusk, right? So that's why it's called the Walrus operator. Well, what's it doing? Okay, so we're looping through this set of locations here. And then what we're doing is, here's the conditional check, right? So this is not the conditional check, right? This team name Walrus operator, that's not the conditional. This part after the Walrus operator, that is the conditional statement. So we're saying, okay, well, if MLB teams.getLocation, now remember, if that's a location like Colorado, if it's in that dictionary, that's going to return the value. So if Colorado is the value of location, it's going to return Rockies. That's not equal to none, so that would pass as true, okay? And what it's going to do is, anytime that's going to essentially evaluate to true or, not none, it's going to say, okay, well, this is a passing conditional. I'm going to store the value returned from that conditional expression into this variable name on the left side of that Walrus operator. So it said, hey, when it's Colorado, we get back the Rockies, right? So I'm going to store that in team name, and that's how we have access to it here. All right, when it's Birmingham, so when location is equal to Birmingham, it's going to call a .get with Birmingham. Well, Birmingham is not in that MLB teams dictionary, so that returns none. So the conditional fails, and it just continues on. All right, so that's how the Walrus operator is working. I encourage you, I know it might still be a little bit confusing here, but I encourage you to kind of, look at yourself whenever you're writing code with conditionals, right? So for loops and conditionals, and see if you're checking a condition and then immediately doing some assignment based off of that conditional. And if you are, that's a prime opportunity to employ that Walrus operator. Especially, I like to use it in this use case, like with a .get, where I can get back none. And if that thing is not none, store that in the variable so I can use it later on. It'll essentially save you a line of code, right? And again, the only thing I would kind of encourage you, as you saw, we could have done this with that extra line of code. If you feel like using this is not as readable, if it doesn't make as much sense to you when you're just looking at this, I encourage you, don't use it, right? I mean, so you write the code that allows you, and not just you right now, but future you 3 months down the road when you're trying to go back and look at your own code and figure out what you did. Write the code that's going to allow you to kind of pick that up with the lowest effort, because that's really important as well. But that is the Walrus operator, and we will continue on with our series of videos on flow control very shortly.